Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Thanks so much for being with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Your stool is ready. We've got three stories to talk about today. We had all good martinis yesterday, and we've got two good martinis today. So it's a pretty good average. First off, today is kind of the last day that you can get prepared for the arrival of Hurricane Milton in Florida. So for all of our friends down there in the Sunshine State, and I've got considerable family members, particularly on Mrs. Columbus's side, who have been through this before, and prayers for them and everyone else in Florida for what could be one of the most severe storms that the state has ever seen. But it's also the source of our first good martini, because one of the weird things that's been playing out over the past couple of days, Jim, is this back and forth between Kamala Harris and Ron DeSantis. NBC News first reported that DeSantis wouldn't return Harris's phone calls, and then Harris commented on a tarmac somewhere saying that, this is not a time for politics. We need to band together to do what's right for the people. And DeSantis fired back saying she's not even in the chain of command. She's never called about a hurricane before. It's obvious that she's just trying to do this to build up her political stock a few weeks before an election. So this issue made it to Joe Biden yesterday, and I believe it was right around the same time Kamala was tripping all over herself on The View, saying that she couldn't think of a single thing that she would have done differently than Joe Biden. And we'll talk more about that in a second.
Foreshadowing the future martinis in this.
Yes, exactly. So Biden jumps in with this.
The governor of Florida has been cooperative. He said he's gotten all that he needs. I talked to him again yesterday, and I said, no, you're doing a great job. It's all being done well. We thank you for it. And I literally gave my personal phone number to call. So I don't know. There was a rough start in some places, but every governor from Florida to North Carolina has been fully cooperative and supportive and acknowledged what this team is doing. And they're doing an incredible job. But we got a lot more to do.
And when he says rough start, I assume he's referring to Hurricane Helene and the situation in Carolina and Tennessee and so forth. And so there's still some controversy about what's going on and what's not going on there. But it seems, Jim, like he's essentially, without addressing the specific controversy, giving a shot in the arm to Ron DeSantis, which you would not expect in that particular situation. So either he's just trying to stay focused on the bigger issue at hand here, which is potentially possible, or this is another example of Joe Biden slyly or without directly kneecapping Kamala Harris. So what do you think it is?
Yeah, so let's assume, for the sake of this conversation, Joe Biden was not thinking of the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, that he was not completely mixing people up, that he was not thinking of a Florida governor who'd passed away several decades. Let's assume Joe Biden is of sound mind and he knows what he's talking about in this. Something that is not really our default setting on this program.
Yeah,
but
not a usual assumption.
This is something of an admission against interest, right? Like you'd think that a Democratic president, if he had any legitimate gripe with a Republican governor, who's pretty prominent on the other side, he would mention it. The fact that he's saying everybody's on the same page, everybody's helping out, everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. First of all, good for Joe Biden for saying that, assuming that it's true. This is not a time for everybody to be, a partisan food fight. Everybody's got to be pulling together. You want to have the federal government and state governments, local governments, all working in simpatico, all working in coordination with each other. The other, DeSantis's objection. So what can Kamala Harris do for the state of Florida that Joe Biden cannot? If there's a legitimate, constitutionally, there's not anything. There's no, as he points out, she's not in the chain of command. There's not like something she can, deploy from FEMA that Biden can't or anything like that. And if she wants to just simply wish well and say we're thinking of the state of Florida, well, that's very nice of her. But I think DeSantis has got a lot on his plate right now. And there's nothing wrong with letting that call go to voicemail. When the crisis is over, you can call and say thanks for, thinking of us and your prayers at that time. But at this point, DeSantis has got a lot to do. And so the question is, what are you going to do, Harris? So I've heard a couple people pointing out that, like, in response to the Hurricane Helene, do you want to see the potential leader of the free world, like, putting supplies in boxes at a time like this? I know it means well. I know it's this, but you have a job as vice president, and so we've seen some other footage of her, in the FEMA meetings and stuff like that. So, but it just, good for Biden for calling it as he sees it, or at least as he recalls it, as he perceives it. But secondly, a sense that you do wonder. Biden has made very clear, despite his insistence that, I decided to step down after 6 weeks of my party telling me I had to go, and Nancy Pelosi's brick through the window and things like that, he's like, maybe he is, quietly seething about this. And maybe he's decided he wants to kneecap Harris every now and then. He had done The View about a week ago, and he had emphasized how they were like this. They never had any serious disagreements. Everything, his record is her record and vice versa, which when you're trying to be the candidate of change is not really the message you're looking for. So you do periodically wonder if Biden has this conscious or maybe subconscious desire to undermine Harris where he can. I think this is too important an issue to really spend too much time, focusing on the political ramifications of. You want to make sure everybody's as prepared as possible in Florida, and everybody in Georgia and Tennessee and Western North Carolina and all those other places gets the aid that they need and can start rebuilding their lives as quickly as possible. I don't think this hurricane is going to, hit the same areas, but it's not terribly far away. And you do wonder at some point if the amount of just emergency supplies and resources start to get strained like that. So, but it's a good for Joe Biden for not helping, fan the flames on what seems like a kind of artificially generated controversy that really isn't needed in this time and place.
Yeah, very interesting. And if there is any bad blood there, they certainly tried very, very hard at the convention to show that there wasn't publicly. But the story that I've never actually seen confirmed, but the suggestion was that Obama contacted Biden sometime that weekend when Biden stepped down and said Kamala's ready to invoke the 25th, because the vice president has to initiate that along with the majority of the cabinet. And so if that's true, well, then it's understandable why he would be mad at Kamala for joining the parade to shove him out the door. So that'd be pure speculation. We don't know. Everything in public when they're together seems to be that they're on the same page. He's always spoken very highly of her, but we know how Joe Biden reacted publicly and privately in some cases to the effort to shove him out the door. And so if she was part of that, if there is some bad blood there, it wouldn't shock me.
So the word was, when Biden was vice president, he had a weekly lunch with Obama. And that's kind of as your vice president, I'm not going to get forgotten about. I'm not going to get shuffled off to the background. You and I are going to be talking regularly. If I got a problem, I'm going to have a, direct access to the boss to say, hey, I think we should be doing X instead of Y. The claim was that Biden and Harris were going to do the same thing when Biden was president. And at least according to their public schedules, that hasn't happened. They stopped fairly early. And what does that say? The other thing is it's also very clear that certain members of the Biden inner circle did not think highly of Harris, resented her going after him in the debate. That little girl was me, implication that he was racist and things like that. The reports that Jill Biden was very slow to forgive on stuff like that. So you kind of wonder, really, do they have that great working relationship that they've had? I think it's very clear. It's now, if somebody went around saying, oh, Joe Biden and Barack Obama had this great working relationship and they were the best of buddies, I think you get laughed out of the room. I think there's just now abundant evidence that, there's always going to be tension between a president and a vice president when the vice president wants that top job. And I think it's become, this was a set of circumstances that would exacerbate those differences. It's not all that shocking to think that Joe Biden might have some lingering resentment that he feels like he's being shoved out the door.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And he seems like the guy who holds grudges. So it's only been a couple of months.
Irish Alzheimer's. You forget everything but a grudge.
Exactly. Well, I don't know exactly how Joe Biden deals with frustrations like that, but he might want to take a stiff drink as he thinks about what could have been for a potential second term and watches his vice president keep going forward after his own party shoved him to the curb. But if he's going to have a drink or two, he should take Z-Biotics first, because if you want to avoid that rough next morning, Z-Biotics is the best way to do it.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. As always, drink responsibly, and you will feel your best the following morning.
And you probably think to yourself, does this actually work? But as I've said many times, my colleague, interested in trying it because as he got older, was having rougher mornings, even though he usually, knew his limits. And all of a sudden, those limits weren't working the next morning. So he tried ZBiotics the next time he went out, and things were perfect the next morning. So it works. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, if you were with us on the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, you know that the first good martini was Kamala's answer to the question from Sunny Hostin on The View: what, if anything, would you have done differently than Joe Biden has done over the past 4 years? And she says there's not a thing that comes to mind. And, oh, by the way, I was part of every major decision, essentially, that this administration made. And so I believe now, unless this is just a Twitter rumor, Donald Trump has taken your advice, Jim, and simply slapped "I'm Donald J. Trump and I approve this" message on there because of Biden's horrible approval ratings. So you would think after that response, the campaign might have come up with a different answer the next time the question comes up, if it comes up. And it did come up again last night when Kamala Harris was a guest of Stephen Colbert. Again, not exactly a tough interviewer on The Late Show on CBS. So he brings it up again. And this time, instead of saying what she said on The View, she just went to the automated stump speech / debate answer, regardless of what the question was.
Polling shows that a lot of people, especially independent voters, really want this to be a change election, and that they tend to break for you in terms of thinking about change. You are a member of the President's administration. Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change in terms of. Yes. But also, I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump. And so when we think about the significance of what this next generation of leadership looks like, were I to be elected president, it is about, frankly, I love the American people, and I believe in our country. I love that it is our character and nature to be an ambitious people. We have aspirations, we have dreams, we have incredible work ethic, and I just believe that we can create and build upon the success we've achieved in a way that we continue to grow opportunity, and in that way grow the strength of our nation. So, for example, my economic policies, I think of it, and I've named it as creating an opportunity economy. So it's about things like investing in small businesses. I love our small businesses.
So if there even was any evaluation after her appearance on The View, it certainly didn't help her appearance on The Late Show.
How do you give an answer that bad when you're effectively given a do-over?
Right.
And, I had mentioned in today's Morning Jolt that we talked yesterday, like, how is it that Sunny Hostin asked the question that kneecapped her? Sunny Hostin, who's probably, of all the hosts on The View, the most, the furthest to the left. And Stephen Colbert, like after swinging, I used the T-ball metaphor yesterday. She swung and she missed, tripped over it, and knocked over the tee. Stephen Colbert came back, puts it back upright, puts it there, shows her how to swing. You ready? Here we go. Take a swing. And she did it again. She totally missed it again. She just because first, what is what are you going to change? What's going to be different? Her answer amounted to, I'm not Joe Biden. I believe in the American people, and I love the American people, and I believe in our country. Kind of implying that Biden doesn't. Right? I know that wasn't what she was trying to say, but things come out and so I wrote about this in today's Morning Jolt, and I've really been thinking about this a lot. To borrow my colleague Noah Rothman's favorite phrase, the theory of the case. Right? It's a term for lawyers. How are you going to make your argument to the judge or to the jury? The entire theory of the case from the Harris campaign is wrong. The entire theory, she's terrified of disagreeing with a guy who's got a 40% approval rating. Colbert is right. The country wants change. She should be leaning into that. And she should be saying, in addition to, I'm not Joe Biden, duh. Okay, we got that. How are you different in terms of policy? And she needed to pick at least one that she could say, I love Joe. I'm proud of what we've done together. But when I'm in charge, we're going to do some things differently. And one of the things I'm going to do differently is X. And there is this absolute terror of laying out what X is. Maybe the early start was price controls, and that did not go well. I went down a whole list of things that I think are like not, I think are appealing to centrists and independents, and also to a certain extent people on the right, but also are not, like if you want to talk about tariffs, there are a whole bunch of countries that have slave labor. What if you said we're going to institute tariffs on countries that use slave labor? You know, that, like, I'm relatively anti-tariff, but that strikes me as one that is morally and economically and geopolitically justified. Increase naval shipbuilding. Like, we've already done infrastructure spending, but military spending. Or just say, I want to really increase the amount of resources we give to Customs and Border Patrol. You don't even have to say you're going to do border fencing. You could just say, like, just have something and say, you know, I'm proud of what we've done, but really, this thing should have been more of a priority. And we let it slip through the cracks, and when I'm president, I'm going to get it done. She can't do that. She can't say that, no matter how many tries you give her. It's really baffling. It is as if she is terrified of acknowledging that anything has gone wrong over the last 4 years. And this, but the other look, this, what has the Harris campaign been offering? Joy, coconut tree memes, right? Like all this kind of stuff. Peggy Noonan had a very good column last weekend where she said, Greg, you know, when we talk about our good martinis, our bad martinis, and our crazy martinis on this, we haven't had that many good martinis. I don't think the country's been in a joyous place for the last 4 years. I don't think the country's been in a joyous place since COVID. Right? You can chalk it up to inflation. You can chalk it up to cost of living, the border, overseas. You got massacres. You got terror attacks. You got invasions. Like, we're not feeling joy. So if you walk around talking about how much joy you're feeling, you just look tone deaf and out of it and kind of in denial about the state of things. I think Harris has to say, hey, you know what? There's some real problems in this country that we have to address. And if she did that, I think she'd do a lot better. But I think there's this, you know, this terror of getting into the details. There's this terror of acknowledging trade-offs. And it just permeates her campaign. And the second thing is that the more generic she gets, the more I think the general public says, we've been here before. Joe Biden was supposed to be a centrist. He was supposed to be a bridge candidate. He was supposed to be this happy, genial, ice cream eating old man. And he turned out to be Dana Carvey's grumpy old man character. And he's got Elizabeth Warren staffers. It's a much further left, you know, Democratic presidency than we expected. We got bait and switched. And the more evasive Harris seems, the less she can close the deal. Now, look, 7 states are all neck and neck. Who knows if this is, you know, how it's going to shake out? I don't think you can say she's lost the election yet. But the Washington Post had this fascinating story. She's spent roughly 3 times as much. She's got 3 times as much campaign infrastructure, officers, volunteers, all that kind of stuff. And all the swing states are still neck and neck. What does that tell you? The problem is not the sales. The problem is the product.
I would say 2 things in response to all of that. Number one, I saw somebody else say it yesterday. The only thing worse for Kamala Harris than ducking interviews is doing interviews, even though most people that she's talking to are extraordinarily sympathetic to her. 60 Minutes is probably the toughest one she's had to do. Dana Bash kind of helped her towards answers, like on why she flip-flopped on so many issues. Compare that to how Dana Bash interviewed J.D. Vance on a Sunday morning, which was almost a debate in and of itself. And then the other thing, I think, is that she actually did sum up her campaign in that answer. I'm not Donald Trump. She's relying on that to get over the finish line, that enough people despise and don't want Donald Trump back to be the next president of the United States. It's a gamble. It's a big gamble when you don't give any specifics.
I don't think there are voters out there who think that Donald Trump is a calm, easygoing, predictable, even-keeled, milquetoast, you know, president. Like, people, his negatives are priced in. People know what they're getting with him, but they have really happy memories of the economy before COVID started. So when you say I'm not Donald Trump, you're also kind of implicitly implying I'm not going to bring back his economy. And I kind of wonder if she's actually hurting herself every time she does that. I think there's just this assumption that the entire country sees Trump as the devil. And you look at the polling numbers, clearly that's not the case.
I think you're right. I also think you're right that America has been less joyful over the past 4.5 years, whether it's COVID, inflation, international strife that we've seen bubble up in so many different areas ever since the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and so forth. And so if there's a lack of joy in your life, there are multiple reasons for that. Sometimes it's external, sometimes it's internal, family tensions and so forth. But there are ways to find help. And today, the 3 Martini Lunch is brought to you by BetterHelp. And yes, October is the season, especially at the end of the month, for costumes and masks, but don't let that be your daily reality. If you're struggling with things, try to get some help. Maybe you can talk to some people in your family or a trusted friend and so forth, but sometimes those issues go deeper and you need more help, and that's where BetterHelp comes in. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. It's also more affordable than most in-person therapy. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/3ml today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And if you go back to 2000, Al Gore and Joe Lieberman won the popular vote. They lost the Electoral College very narrowly as a result of the upheaval in Florida. And you can remember over that month and change, Al Gore frequently coming to the podium and going, even though Joe Lieberman and I won the popular vote, ... and how the latest legal challenge would be about counting every vote. They ultimately lost because of the Electoral College. That's what the Constitution has always said determines the President of the United States. 2016, Trump wins the Electoral College. Hillary wins the popular vote. Hillary blames the Electoral College and Russia and Jim Comey and subservient women. And take your pick. Everything else, it wasn't her fault at all, of course. And now we've got another very tight race where it's certainly possible where the Democrats could win the popular vote and not the Electoral College. Well, Tim Walz, who just the other day on 60 Minutes says he needs to pick his words more carefully, and sometimes Kamala has to tell him that, well, he's done it again. CBS News and a California fundraiser hosted at Governor Gavin Newsom's home Tuesday in Sacramento. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz advocated for doing away with the Electoral College system, stating that, quote, we need a national popular vote. Quote, I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go, the Democratic vice presidential candidate said, but that's not the world we live in. So we need to win Beaver County, Pennsylvania. We need to be able to go into York, Pennsylvania and win. We need to be in Western Wisconsin and win. We need to be in Reno, Nevada and win. And of course, as soon as those comments were made public, the Harris-Walz campaign said that Walz, quote, believes that every vote matters in the Electoral College, and he is honored to be traveling the country and battleground states working to earn support for the Harris-Walz ticket. He was commenting to a crowd of strong supporters about how the campaign is built to win 270 electoral votes, and he was thanking them for their support that is helping fund those efforts. Getting rid of the Electoral College is not a position the campaign holds, a campaign official said. But, Jim, it is pretty much a position of the Democratic Party when you look at all these states around the country, almost entirely blue states, who are trying to put together this consortium that they'll devote their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. They haven't gotten there yet, so it's kind of a pie-in-the-sky dream at this point. But the dream on the left is clearly to do away with this. And I thought these are the people defending and protecting our norms for future generations.
So, first of all, Greg, you're like, oh, we've been doing this for a long time. Can you remember a presidential campaign ever having to issue a statement that what the vice presidential nominee just said is not our campaign position?
It's rare, I think, yes.
Trump campaign has not had to do that about J.D. Vance.
No.
Never had to do it with Mike Pence. Tim Walz, Tim Kaine. I'm mixing up my tips. Gore and Clinton, Lieberman and Gore, Cheney, it's not surprising the vice presidential nominee might have different views than the president. But you, by the way, I want to say to listeners, I want to start a petition that Greg should do every episode entirely in the voice of Al Gore. Because when you're a vice president, you're supposed to take all of your areas where you disagree with the presidential nominee and you put them in a lockbox. And you just lock them away. You put them in a blind trust for 48 years because your job is to support the nominee. And people might know you've got different. Dick Cheney was very famously a strong supporter of gay marriage when George W. Bush was not. But he did not open his mouth about it very much. I think we know because of Cheney's family connections to that. But his attitude was, when you're vice president, your job is to solve problems for the president. Your job is not to cause problems for the president. Tim Walz missed that memo. By the way, if the Democratic vice presidential nominee is spending early October complaining about the Electoral College, Does that tell you the campaign feels good about the state of how they're going to do in the Electoral College? Or does that make you think maybe they're nervous that they're going to win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College? Which, by the way, feels very plausible right now. Not certain, but, and then as you point out, the norms, like remember, we have to save our system of government, our values, our rules, our law, our customs. We need to be protecting them from Donald Trump. And that's why we need to completely throw out the way we elect presidents. That's where they're operating on right now. And so, look, I don't want to completely recite everything, but like regularly on this podcast, I think if we go back, if Trump wins this, and again, it's roughly 50-50. If Trump wins this and, Trump wins Pennsylvania, we're going to look at picking Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro, like the Portland Trail Blazers picking Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan. Like, is just a stunning... you could have done yourself so much good locking up one of, not just the Keystone State, but maybe the Keystone State of the Electoral College this year. And she didn't do it. And she went with this goofball who can't stay on message and botched the debate. It was all folksy, but he hasn't done any good in the blue wall states. So it is basically the other thing that I observed today, which is fascinating. So we have these 7 states that are all neck and neck, whether you're looking at Real Clear Politics or you're looking at 538, almost any measurement. Greg, I can't find an 8th state that's competitive. It's not New Hampshire. It's not our home state of Virginia. I mean, technically, Texas is in the neighborhood of like 5 percentage points, but that's like a 500,000 votes. That's not the sort of thing you can just find, that you're going to find in, under a rock somewhere in Texas. So it all comes down to those 7. And she had the option to pick a guy who could pretty much do as much as any human being on the planet to lock down one of the biggest of the 7. And she didn't pick that guy because she was afraid of the Hamas protesters.
And Walz put out a pretty aggressive social media campaign, which apparently worked. And of course, you go into a campaign knowing what the rules are. It's not like anybody runs for president and goes, oh, what is this Electoral College contraption?
Right.
I had no idea that these were the rules. I think Britt Hume was the first one to do this years ago, and it's so right. It's like a team that loses a football game saying, but we had more yards. What's up with this? Focusing on points. I mean, it's obvious we had more yards than them. Unfair. Totally unfair.
By the way, if the moment you switch to a national popular vote, the only places that matter are the West Coast and the East Coast. Because there's just so many votes there. And you'd only campaign in cities. You'd only campaign in spots like that. Like the whole point, like the founders knew what they were doing. They wanted you to have to build a broad consensus to be elected president. And you could argue about, you got to win a certain number of states. The rules did not pop out of nowhere. Exactly.
And while we get annoyed when John Ralston says it all the time, the founders thought the states mattered.
Yes.
And so that's why we have a Senate where despite population, every state gets 2 and the left hates that. We do have another chamber based on population in case you missed that, lefties. It's called the House of Representatives. It's how the system was set up and it works well. And so whether it's the Electoral College or the New York Times and the New Yorker saying, what's really to blame for all of our political dysfunction? The Constitution.
Yeah. There you
go. don't believe that the left is the safeguard of our democracy and the norms. They just see it as a path to power.
You matter, Nevada, and so do you, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. Those other 43 states, better luck next time.
True enough. Jim Garrity, have a great day.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Big help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.